Hi, it's Derek and we're back here at Hitchcocks, where today we'll be conducting an oil and filter change on the Royal Enfield Bullet UCE, commonly referred to as the unit construction engine. It's one of the most common but also one of the most essential tasks that the average home mechanic can achieve using a simple set of tools. The bike we'll be using today is the Royal Enfield Bullet B5. This is a 2015, but it equally applies to the 350, the 500, and of course the Continental GT 535 that all have the unit construction engine. The term unit construction also means the fact that the oil services both the engine, the primary, and the gearbox. So the oil change we'll conduct today serves the purpose of changing all of those in one go. So today we'll be using an oil filter set, all of the essential O-rings and any of the copper washers that are required. In the maintenance manual, Royal Enfield state that it takes a 1550 oil. The oil of choice at Hitchcocks is Silcoline, where we use the competition 4. And the maintenance manual tells us that the dry engine holds 2.75 litres of oil. Because we're doing an oil change today, it'll probably only drain just over a couple of litres. That's important to remember, because when you come to refill it, if you did try to put 2.75 in, you would overfill it. There is a sight glass on the side of the engine. It has 2 marks on it. The upper and lower levels are only 350 millilitres difference, so we'll be keeping a careful eye on that as we refill it later. So in order to drop the oil out of this, what we need to do now is take a look at the oil plugs we'll be removing underneath the engine. Right, so to help us before we get started, we've preheated this engine. It's been running for a few minutes, so the oil's nice and warm. That'll assist us when we come to drop the oil out. The other thing I always do, I've got my oil tray for draining the oil, but I also like to keep a second tray. As I remove the bits from the bike, I can drop them straight in the tray. I'm not going to reuse them, so I know they're out of the way too. Before I do anything with the bike, job one is going to be to pre-oil the filter. So I'm just going to do that now. That can be sat in the oil, getting pre-charged. So that's my oil filter, and I'm now going to take the rear plug from the back of the bike and start to drain the oil. When I remove the rear drain plug, the first thing I'm going to look at when that comes out is there is a little magnet located in the top of this drain plug. I'm inspecting that to see if there's any debris, metallic, attached to the top of that. It's not a problem if there's a small amount. I'm expecting to see that, but I'm just checking it to make sure there's nothing sinister with that. As I said before, on this bike, we've got an additional drain plug, so I'm going to release that one at the front. That will assist in getting the maximum amount of oil to drain from the engine. The other thing I'm going to do at this point now is remove the 2 bolts from the filter gauze. I'm going to take the cap off that, and inside there I'm just going to pull the gauze out, and that is going to be cleaned with some carburetor cleaner just to get that nice and clean. It is reusable, so you'll never throw that away. Likewise, when I take out the filter gauze, which has the 2 bolts in, I will look in the centre of the cap. Again, there is a magnet in there, and I'll be looking to see how much debris there may be on that. A little bit isn't a problem. It's just a visual check to make sure everything's okay with the engine with that. So if that's okay, I'll give it a wipe off and a clean. Whilst it's off, I'll inspect the O-ring that's on it, and if necessary, that will be replaced. So the oil's draining nicely out of there. So the next job I've got, which is the best job to do while all of that's happening, it's going to take about 10 minutes to drain through there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to remove this oil filter. On the earlier bikes, you'll see that there were 2 bolts holding this cover on. On this particular bike, it's a later bike, it's got the 3 bolts on the cover. So I'm going to now remove those 3 bolts, but I'm going to leave my thumb in the middle of that because there's actually a spring behind there. So it is slightly sprung while I take off the 3 bolts. There's the 3 bolts done. I'm now just going to remove that cover, retaining the oil filter in there and the O-rings. And in the top of this, you will see it's got the spring, but also located in there is a very small O-ring, which I'm going to replace. It comes as part of the kit. Pull the oil filter out. When I replace that, it doesn't matter which way around it goes. You'll see there's another O-ring at the back, so I'm just going to hook that out as well. So earlier on in the video, I mentioned about the cap that was retaining the oil filter and the fact that it has a small O-ring in there. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to remove this the spring retaining plate, and underneath that is the little O-ring. So we're going to take that off and we're going to replace that so we get a nice seal on this when we put it all back up together. So just taking the spring retaining plate off now. And there's the little O-ring there, so we're going to remove the O-ring. Put that over there out the way. Here's the new O-ring, so we're going to put that in. Replace that with the washer, the retaining washer that will go over the O-ring. Make sure it's well seated. They're always a little tricky to get over, but that's on now. So I'm going to put my washer back over. I'm putting that back onto the plate. Just tighten it up and that's done. So now we've completed that task. One final job to do. We're just going to remove the ring after we've checked it there, the O-ring, and we'll replace it with this one, which will go back into there so the cap snugs down nice and tight on the engine casing. Obviously, put everything back in reverse order with the new components. So the first thing that's going in is my new O-ring. I'm going to push that to the back, making sure it's sat up at the back of the chamber. I've taken my pre-charged oil filter. I'm pushing that into there now. I've now got my cap that I previously replaced the little O-ring on. I'm going to position the new O-ring on the cap and then fit this into place and secure with the 3 screws. I'm just going to tighten those up finger tight and just tighten them over slightly. We'll torque those over for the final setup. One point while I'm on that, all of the bolts on Royal Enfields always go with gentle hands. What we don't want to be doing is stripping any of these threads, particularly any of these underneath. So we've now refitted the oil filter and we've got one final task to do. This is drained well, we've got the 3 holes draining out there, but what we'd like to do is we're just going to tip the bike from side to side a couple of times just to try and get out any remaining oil that may be in there, just to make sure we've drained as much as possible. So what we've just done now is we've dropped the bike down on the stand, and as I mentioned earlier, we're just going to lean the bike over to remove the remaining oil residue in the bike. So we're just getting the last remnants of oil from the engine while the drain plugs are out. I'm just going to tilt it one way, I'm just going to tilt it over the other, and we're just making sure all that oil's gone from the engine. So the next stage now is I'm just going to remove the copper washer from the main drain plug. I've inspected these, I had a look for any debris on them, and I've cleaned them off, and so I'm just going to replace it now with the new filter on there, the new washer on there. Likewise with this one, I'm taking the old one off. I'm going to put the new copper washer onto this. I've got one final job to do, and that's the cap on the filter gauze. I'm going to remove the existing seal and I'm going to replace it with the new seal, which will go onto there. Everything's nice and clean, so we're ready to put those in. Remember what I said about not over tightening these. I'm going to put these in hand tight to start with and just give them a little turn over. We'll just snug them up and then use the torque wrench to torque them down to the correct torque. Okay, so we've refitted the main drain oil plug at the rear. We've fitted the smaller drain plug at the front. We've snugged those up, and we've got the filter gauze with the 2 bolts in the center. We've got that snugged back up as well. Remember what I was saying about the oil earlier on? The manufacturer states that a fresh engine holds 2.75 litres. Today we've conducted the oil change, so it'll probably take a little over 2 litres. So initially I'm going to remove the plug at the top and I will put in 2 litres of oil, which should appear in the sight glass below. You'll note that there are 2 marks on the sight glass. What I'm looking for is to get that just above midway at the initial filling. The distance between these two, incidentally, is 350 millilitres of oil. So initial fill, get it to a little above half, put the cap back on. We're going to start the bike, run it up for about a minute while it's still on the stand. We're not going to be tilting it or taking it off the stand. Leave it on the stand, run it up for a minute, switch off, let it settle, and then we'll be coming back to check again, and if required we'll do a top up so that this sight glass, the oil is sitting just below the full level there. So we've dropped the bike down on the stand, the oil's in, we've done the final checks, everything's tight and snug, and what we're going to do now is just start the bike to let the oil circulate. We're not going to move the bike on the stand, we're not going to tilt it, we're just going to start it, let it run for a minute. I'm going to switch it off, leave it for a few minutes, and we'll just check the levels again. Okay, so there you have it. The oil change is complete. All of the components we've used today are available and in Hitchcocks stock. You can find the link below to view the parts, and also, just as importantly, in the comments section, please keep those coming. If there's anything you'd like to see us do that will assist you in the general maintenance of your bike, we're only too happy to help.